You're listening to Kentucky Running, presented by John's Run Walk Shop in Lexington. Help others find this show by rating, reviewing, and subscribing in your podcast app. This episode is sponsored by Curex Insoles.
Hey runners, thanks for tuning in. Matt Reno here, and we've got another episode with MoveSmart physical therapist Kelsey Karnes. We're going to be talking about pelvic floor health, why it's important to pay attention to it, and how it affects runners. But first, got some exciting news for people in the Lexington area. John's Run Walk Shop has a new location to make shopping for shoes, apparel, and whatever else you need that much more convenient. In addition to our stores in Chevy Chase and Palomar Center, we now have a third store in the Hamburg area. We're at 3090 Helmsdale Place in the Brighton Place shops. We're right next to Five Guys, so my lunch breaks just got more fun. We have a lot of events happening in the coming weeks, and of course we have sales happening for the holiday season, so you can save money when you shop local this year. Head to johnsrunwalkshop.com to see a list of upcoming sales and events and to check out our holiday gift guide. Looking forward to seeing you at our new Hamburg store. Now, on with the show. We're learning about pelvic floor health right after this. Hey runners, real quick, I want to tell you about Kentucky running sponsor Curex Insoles, available at John's Run Walk Shop. Getting the right shoes on your feet is crucial, but it's only part of solving the foot health puzzle. You also need to make sure your arches are fully supported when you're running or just going through your day-to-day activities. Curex Run Pro insoles could be just what you need. Their flexible support and shock-absorbing cushioning help reduce fatigue. That prevents common running injuries, keeping you out there longer. Dynamic arch support with a deep decoupled heel cup fits, wraps, and locks the heel in place to improve stability, reduce pressure, and provide a perfect fit. And they help manage moisture with a mesh top layer and premium foam cushioning to keep your feet dry and running shoes fresh. They come in 3 profiles, high, medium, and low, to fit your individual arch type. I wear the medium profile, that's the yellow one, but to find which one works best for you, head to John's Run Walk Shop. Ask us to check out your arches and knee alignment, and we'll help you find the right pair of Curex Run Pro insoles for you. Learn more at johnsrunwalkshop.com/insoles. Kelsey, welcome back to Kentucky Running.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm excited.
So I'll admit, this is a topic I had not heard much about until I read some of your blog posts on the MoveSmart website. So for those who are as clueless as I am, can you define what we mean when we say pelvic floor?
Yes. So the pelvic floor is a group of muscles that sit at the bottom of your pelvis, and it helps to support bladder, sexual function, as well as bowel function. And so your pelvic floor is just like any other muscle in your body. It contracts and it relaxes. We have voluntary control over it. I think that's kind of a new concept for a lot of people. They think this muscle is some obscure thing that they don't have access to, but it works just like any other muscle in our body. And it kind of moves up and down throughout the day and contracts and relaxes with different things to help prevent having urinary leakage, leakage of gas or stool, and then to help regulate sexual function and help with like managing pelvic pain and things like that.
What functions does it serve for a runner's body particularly?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The muscles of the pelvic floor kind of sit like a bowl at the bottom of the pelvis. And so I tell people to think about it kind of like a trampoline. When you jump on a trampoline, it moves down and back up and down and back up and down and back up. And that's what the pelvic floor does when we're running. So as we're running and our body's absorbing that impact, there's force that's going down onto our abdominal cavity, like our bladder and our rectum and some of our other pelvic organs. And as that pressure goes down, if we have a full bladder or if we feel like we have to pee, our pelvic floor muscles have a role in contracting so that that urine or stool or gas or whatever doesn't escape while we're running. So it helps to play a really big role in continence, so not having leakage when you're running. And then secondarily, it plays a really good role in supporting the organs of the pelvis and the bottom of the abdominal cavity. So some people will report feeling symptoms of like heaviness or like a falling out sensation in the vaginal area for women. And then the pelvic floor is usually responsible for either doing a good job helping to support and prevent that, or when it's not working correctly, sometimes people will have less support to those pelvic organs and experience things like that heaviness or falling out, or they'll have pain. It also functions a little bit with our hip muscles. So it is a rotator of the hip. And so running obviously uses our hip muscles a lot. And so our pelvic floor kind of helps to support and facilitate some of that movement of the hips.
And what are some of the issues that we can have stemming from pelvic floor if they're not being taken care of?
Leakage is a big one. That's probably the biggest one that I see patients for with running is they'll say like, when I run, I feel like I'm leaking urine or I feel like I'm going to have leakage. So people will feel, we call that urgency. When you feel like you're going to pee or you feel like you have to pee, that can come along with some leakage or it can just be a feeling that you feel. And so those are probably the two most common things is urgency and leakage. And then secondarily, something that I will see is just pelvic pain. And so some people will tell me, hey, when I'm running, I have pain in my like tailbone or in my sits bones, which are kind of the bones at the bottom of your pelvis. Or they'll say, I feel like a cramping sensation in that area. So those are some things that people can experience when they're running.
Okay. And this is something that affects both men and women?
Yes, absolutely. I would say there's a higher incidence of pelvic floor dysfunction in runners amongst female bodied individuals. But we still see this a lot too in male bodied individuals. And we see it, I would say, when I'm treating people with male anatomy, I will see more symptoms of pain being the primary symptom associated with running. So a lot of my male patients will tell me, yeah, I feel like my tailbone kind of hurts when I'm running, or it hurts after I get done running, or I feel just like hip pain when I'm running. And then if there's been some surgical changes to the anatomy, such as like post prostatectomy, so having the prostate removed or other surgical changes, sometimes we will see some issues with urinary leakage as well in patients with male anatomy who are runners.
And you've said in your post that pelvic floor issues are common but not normal. So what do you mean by that?
So research shows, and I'm going to speak just on like female bodied individuals for this research because that's where most of it's been done. Research shows that 33% of women experience urinary leakage, and that number increases to 50% over the age of 50. So that's very common. That's 1 in 3 people have some level of pelvic floor dysfunction. Usually that's leakage, but there's a lot of other things that can fall under the title of pelvic floor dysfunction. So it is really common, 1 in 3 and then 1 in 2 as we get older. But it isn't normal in the sense that it doesn't have to be happening. So it is a sign that your muscles or something in your system isn't functioning at 100%. So I tell people if you're experiencing symptoms like leakage, pain, sexual dysfunction, bowel dysfunction, yes, that can be common, but it doesn't need to be your normal and to seek help for that.
What should people be paying attention to before the symptoms appear? How can we prevent this?
So it depends. Like there's a lot of different things. So there's some kind of precursors that can be like warning signs of pelvic floor dysfunction maybe being present, or kind of warning signs that if you continue on a path, you might contribute to some pelvic floor dysfunction. These by no means are like straightforward across the board. But some of those signs are in female bodied individuals feeling like you're having pain with sex or you can't insert a tampon fully. Constipation is one of the biggest things. So, unmanaged constipation, both in male and females, is a huge precursor to pelvic floor dysfunction and also something that can be managed to help prevent pelvic floor dysfunction. So, constipation is a big one. It can also be a result of pelvic floor dysfunction. So, sometimes it's a result of just like the food you're eating, you're not hydrating well enough, but it can a lot of times be a result of dysfunction already present there. Another thing that I see that I think is a preventable way for us to mitigate pelvic floor issues is to think about how we're holding our posture in our body when we're running and also just throughout the day. So I am going to call out my like chronic butt clenchers. So people who are like chronically clenching their glutes together, either at the gym because they're like, I'm going to get these muscles stronger. Kelsey's been on here before and told me my glutes are important for injury prevention. So I'm just going to like clench them all the time. Those people, I will see a higher likelihood of pelvic floor issues in, or people who are sitting in a super slouched posture all day, or conversely, trying to sit super up straight, like they're trying to pull their body up into this like rigid type posture all day long. And then I would say maybe the last thing that I see associated with or contributing to pelvic floor dysfunction is people who are ab grippers, like people who feel like, and I see this way more with women than men, but people who tend to like pull in and like suck in their abs all the time or pull their belly in all the time because they want to look a certain way or they want to feel a certain way about their body. And I think society has kind of endorsed this in some ways. And so people that tend to hold in their belly or tighten their belly for long periods of time when it's not needed, like when you're not working out, you're not doing anything, that can also contribute to some dysfunction around the pelvic floor.
Okay. So back to the butt clenching part. I have the Peloton app. I'll do some home workouts with that. And it seems like every time I'm doing a core workout and we get to planks, the instructors are always saying, squeeze your glutes, squeeze your glutes. Is that bad advice?
So it's not necessarily bad advice, but I tell people muscles aren't meant to be just like held constantly in a contracted state. They're made to contract and relax. Now, when we're holding a plank, we're holding our body in a contracted state. But your glute should automatically be activating there. You shouldn't be having to add a lot of extra effort to it. Same with like a squat or a deadlift. I see butt clenching happen a lot with that. People will do a squat and they'll squat down and then they'll come up. And then at the top of their squat, when they finish, they'll like squeeze their glutes really hard. And that's excessive. So that's not, and a lot of times, honestly, that's encouraged in workout classes, but that's not how our glutes are really designed to function. And that can encourage a holding pattern of tension in those muscles. And so I tell people just you should feel them activating, but they should be activating automatically. You shouldn't have to be adding a lot of over squeezing to these muscles when you're working out.
Can pelvic floor dysfunction be exacerbated by running, or do we see a higher instance of that happening in runners as opposed to the general population?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not like super familiar of any research talking about as far as incidence rates between runners and non-runners. I will, though, share my opinion and clinical expertise on, does running make your pelvic floor symptoms worse? I think there's a lot of misinformation around this topic out there. And my answer to this is always it can, but it doesn't have to. Just like anything else with running, I tell people pelvic floor dysfunction with running is just the same as like any other running related injury that you have going on. So running isn't always appropriate for every person at every point in time. So if you're having shin splints and you think you might have a stress fracture, yeah, running's totally going to make that worse, right? And running's going to contribute to that problem. Same thing with your pelvic floor. If you're peeing your pants every single time you run, or you're having pelvic pressure or pain and it's being exacerbated by your running, then absolutely continuing to run is going to make that worse. However, if you have underlying pelvic floor issues and you don't see a worsening of those symptoms before or after or during a run, then running absolutely may not be worsening those symptoms. There are a few subset of cases where I would say to have precaution with running. That would be like the postpartum population. So I think I see a lot of issues with people getting back into running too quickly postpartum. And I'll be happy to elaborate more on that because I have a lot of thoughts on that matter. But I see a lot of people getting back too quickly, and then running does contribute to some pelvic floor issues. Or people who have this pre-existing pelvic floor issue going on and it's being worsened by running, then yeah, probably need to address your running momentarily to help not make that issue worse. But really, I like to encourage people to think about it just like they would any other injury that you have or issue you're having in your body. And you're going to kind of dictate your running based on that, how you're responding to that injury.
What kind of things have you seen that people are feeling that pain or discomfort and they're pushing through it because they think it's just part of running or it's just part of aging or postpartum or whatever, and they really shouldn't be pushing through?
Yeah, same as some of my like general orthopedic recommendations carry over for the pelvic floor. So if you're feeling pain, whether that is in the hips, the tailbone, pubic bone, the SI area, so the back side of the pelvis, the low back, the structures in and around the pelvis, the pelvic floor, first off, can refer all over the place. I never rule out when people tell me they have pelvic floor issues and they're having pain, like some distant place from the pelvic floor. I never rule out and say the pelvic floor can't contribute to that because I've been surprised way too many times in my career by the things that it can do. But so if you have pain that is not improving over a run, so let's say you go out on a run, 20 minutes into your run, you start having some tailbone pain and it's maybe like a 3 out of 10 intensity. As you're running, you run another mile, you think, okay, maybe it'll get better. Maybe I'm just tired. And it starts to get a little worse and it's kind of increasing. And then you stop and you walk a little bit. And then you get back to running again and it continues to persist. And then after you get done with your run, it's still hurting or sore or achy, or you feel it later that night. Like those are all signs that like you're probably pushing it too much and you probably should listen to your body and change what you're doing. So those aren't just normal running signs. So pain that's above that 3 out of 10, that is like getting worse as you run or not getting better as you run, is definitely not your normal running discomfort.
Let's talk about some of the treatment prevention strategies that you teach. You have one method called the diaphragmatic 360-degree breathing. What is that?
Our pelvic floor muscles function best when we coordinate them with our breathing. And so our diaphragm, which is a muscle we use to breathe, it sits kind of just underneath our rib cage here. And so it goes down and up as we breathe throughout the day. Okay. So unless we're just like breathing like this, if I'm not just breathing up into my shoulders, then my diaphragm's not getting as much movement as it can get. But if we're breathing and we're getting some movement in our rib cage, our diaphragm's kind of moving up and down. Well, our pelvic floor muscles, they sit at the bottom of our pelvis. So they're kind of like this little bowl at the bottom. Our diaphragm's up here at the top. And as we breathe in, our diaphragm comes down and our pelvic floor relaxes. And as we breathe out, our diaphragm pulls up and our pelvic floor shortens. Now, this isn't really noticeable throughout the day. Like when I'm just sitting here talking to you, there's not much movement happening. But when we're running and when we're out of breath and we're breathing heavier, then that movement is more pronounced. So we've got this movement going up and down. I find in 90% of the patients that I'm seeing that are having issues with running that are pelvic floor related, it's almost always due to a discoordination between the way they're breathing and how well their diaphragm's functioning and their pelvic floor. So I teach a concept called 360 breathing, which is the idea that when you inhale and you breathe in, you should feel expansion in the front of your ribs and your belly. You should feel expansion in the side of your ribs. So these are my rib hands here. So my ribs should expand out as I breathe in. And then even in the back side of my ribs. So the back side of my rib cage should expand out as I breathe as well. So I'll have patients put their hands around their rib cage and see if they can feel movement all the way around. That's where the 360 comes from. All the way around the lower rib cage. So in the front, in the sides, and in the back as they breathe in. A lot of people struggle with that. They'll say like, oh, actually, I just only feel my shoulders moving, or I don't feel any movement at all, or I feel just my belly moving. And so the diaphragm's a muscle just like any other muscle. So you can retrain this and you can kind of teach these muscles to work in the way that you want them to by changing positions, by just being a little bit more focused in your exercise. And so that's kind of what I mean by that 360 breathing is it's a way to get the diaphragm to move through its full range of motion so that it optimizes your pelvic floor.
Okay. All right, I'm going to try this right now.
Yeah, try it.
I'm putting my hands like this. I've got my thumbs like toward the back of my rib cage.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And you got your fingers on the front.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Now I want you to just take a slow breath in and you're going to see if you can feel that expansion in the front, in your fingers, in the back by your thumb, and in the sides of your hand as you breathe in.
Yep. Yeah. I feel it.
Awesome.
Okay.
A+.
All right.
You're
good.
doing it.
A pass. Awesome. Cool. All right. Some other analogies you've used, balloon breath, toothpaste tube. What are these about and how are they effective?
Yes. So I have found as a pelvic floor PT, I have to get really creative with some of my analogies and visualizations because the hard part about the pelvic floor is we can't see it. So it's like, I don't know if it's doing the right thing. I can't see what it's doing. Just like if I was having somebody do like bicep curls, like you can see your bicep contracting and relaxing, right? So I use some different analogies to help people understand that. So when I say balloon breathing, it's just using that analogy of thinking about your kind of lower belly and torso or kind of rib cage area, basically where I just had you put your hands. So kind of that area around your ribs and your belly. is expanding like a balloon. A balloon fills on all sides. When you put air into that balloon, it stretches on all sides of the balloon. It doesn't just stretch on one side, it stretches all the way around. And so I'll tell people to pretend that like their belly and their back and their rib cage is like a balloon. And as they breathe in, you're inflating that balloon. And as you breathe out, you're deflating that balloon. And then my concept, and this is the toothpaste breathing, is definitely one of my more creative examples. I actually got this from a patient. I was trying to explain to her how I wanted her to engage her abs. And she was like, I'm confused. This isn't like, I'm not understanding this. And so we're talking about stuff and she finally gets it. And she's like, oh, it's kind of like I'm like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. And I was like, yeah, that's a great analogy. And so a lot of people, let's say I'm coaching proper ab activation with like a sit up or proper ab activation with like flutter kick or like a leg lowering or things like that. Someone's having back pain or pelvic floor issues and I'm coaching them in how to get their kind of deep abs turned on. A lot of people have a hard time connecting with their deeper abs that function as kind of a spinal stabilizer. And so I'll use this concept of thinking about drawing in your abs on an exhale, like you are going to squeeze toothpaste out of the tube. So I tell people to think about like all of your air that you just inflated when you blew up your balloon is kind of in your lungs. And you're going to try to use your ab muscles to think about exhaling that air out through your mouth like you're squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. Does that make sense, kind of?
Yeah, totally. When I'm running and I have a cramp, that's kind of the way
Yeah.
I breathe. This is what my cross country coach told me in high school. Just, breathe. He didn't use the toothpaste analogy, but that it kind of fits. Like, just
Yeah.
squeeze out all the air, like exhale and then exhale more than you think you can until like you can't anymore. That helps the cramp go away.
Yes. And actually, I have seen a lot of success with people who are experiencing side stitches or cramping and stuff like that in the abdominal area by having people take a more diaphragmatic approach to breathing with running and think about, okay, when you're starting to feel that side stitch, I want you to take some really deep, basically exactly what you're saying, really deep breath in, think about your ribs expanding, and then blow all of your air out and kind of slow down that breathing pattern a little bit. You may have to slow down a little bit in your pace when you're running. And a lot of times that'll really help to take care of some of the cramping that people are experiencing.
When should a runner or anybody else stop relying on just these exercises themselves and then start seeking specialized pelvic floor physical therapy?
Yeah, so I pretty much encourage people that if you're having any issues with bowel, bladder, or sexual dysfunction, to go ahead and see a pelvic floor PT. In the state of Kentucky, with most insurances, you can directly access them. You don't have to have a referral. It depends on your insurance and depends on the PT, but most PTs you can just call and schedule an appointment. And so if you're having issues, so I'll list a few. Bladder issues could be leakage, could be pain when you're emptying your bladder, feeling like you can't empty your bladder all the way, or having like significant changes in how often you're peeing during a day. Bowel issues could be things like constipation. If you're not having a bowel movement 3 or more times a week, like that's not good. If you're eating food, it needs to be processing through the system. Or things like diarrhea. I think I see that a lot more in runners, is feeling like, oh, every time I go for a run, I got to like find the porta potty. Or we all like have stood in line at the beginning of a race, right? Waiting for everybody to get their like nervous bathroom uses out, right?
Yeah.
So if that becomes like uncontrollable, right? Like you're having to stop multiple times mid-course to use the bathroom, that's something you should probably touch base with someone about. And then, of course, any type of pain that's not getting better. So that could be pain during running that's in your hips or your pelvis or your low back, tailbone. That could be pain after running in any of those areas. Or it could be changes in pain with intercourse. That's a really common way that we can detect pelvic floor dysfunction, seeing how our body responds to like sexual intercourse. Just because our pelvic floor plays such a big role in that for both men and women, that can oftentimes be an indicator that like, hey, we probably should get this looked at if we're starting to have pain or some type of changes to how our body's responding to that activity.
And what does the physical therapy involve?
Yeah, great question. It can look very different, just like for anything you're going to PT for. It can look very different based on what's going on. So there's components that as a pelvic floor PT, I have some additional training in. And I usually encourage people, if you're having issues with bowel bladder sexual dysfunction or this like obscure hip or pelvic pain that nobody else can kind of figure out, it is best to see somebody that is actually trained as a pelvic floor PT because we have additional tools at our disposal to be able to assess the pelvic floor. Now, that's not always accessible in every area. So in rural areas, that's less common. But if you do have that accessible to you and you're having those symptoms, do try to seek someone that has had training or calls themselves a pelvic floor PT, because I'm trained in how to assess the pelvic floor muscles via internally or externally. So there's a couple different ways that we can assess what are these muscles of your body doing. For female-bodied individuals, we can assess those muscles intravaginally, and it's typically with a single glove finger inserted vaginally. And we'll look at people trying to contract those muscles. So contracting their pelvic floor like they're trying to stop the flow of urine or gas, relaxing their muscles, and then we'll look at mobility. So how well do those muscles move with their breathing? How well do they move when they bear down? How well do they coordinate with their ab muscles? And then can get really specific in there. If there's pain, we can do some palpation to figure out what muscles are causing this pain. Are these muscles causing your pain? And then for male-bodied individuals, we can also do an internal assessment. We typically do that rectally. That's the gold standard way to assess the pelvic floor in male-bodied individuals. It's a very similar thing as what I just described, but a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. So I have a lot of patients that come in and they're like, wait, my doctor told me to go to pelvic floor PT, and they did not tell me I was going to have a pelvic exam when I came in. And so I always tell my patients, and I always tell people that having an internal exam never has to be a part of your pelvic floor PT experience. If you're seeing a pelvic floor PT that's refusing to assess your muscles unless you consent to an internal exam, find a different pelvic floor PT, because just because that is our gold standard way to assess, it's not our only way. So there's a lot of other tools that I'll use, such as palpation externally, visualization. We also have tools at our disposal called biofeedback, which is a kind of external technique for us to look at muscle function. So the reason that it does require more kind of an invasive approach is just because our pelvic floor muscles aren't able to be visualized externally like a lot of our other muscles. They also, though, should be screening your whole body orthopedically. So they should be looking at posture, hip mobility, hip strength, core strength, breathing, range of motion of your spine. So all those other things that you would expect to see at PT should 100% be a part of your pelvic floor PT experience as well, because the pelvic floor is just part of the rest of your body and it doesn't function in isolation.
Sure, a lot of listeners breathe a sigh of relief that the rectal exam is not mandatory.
Yes. Yeah. It is like I said, it's a common part of like some things that I do, but it is usually there's a long conversation about that with patients before we even consider if we need to assess those things or not.
Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I hadn't even heard the term pelvic floor before I saw you had written about it on MoveSmart. And then there was recently an article in Runner's World about it. So I'm like, okay, it looks like people are talking about this more. But did you find that previously, just because of that area of the body, which can be kind of taboo for society, is this a health issue that has not been getting enough attention?
Yeah, so it absolutely is. I have been practicing as in pelvic floor specifically for, I think, 6 years now. And when I first started, it was much less talked about than it is now. And people were much more uncomfortable to like come and see me and talk about their pelvic floor issues. I think that previously there's kind of been a stigma around it of like it's embarrassing or like not socially appropriate to talk about like bowel bladder sexual function. So then people don't talk about it. So they don't know that what they're experiencing is normal or abnormal. I think that one of the biggest things that I've seen that has helped this is social media. I have patients now that literally come to me because they saw a TikTok video about pelvic health. So I love it. With anything, there's always some misinformation that gets put out there. And we've seen different information get put out over the years about the pelvic floor. But yeah, so I think social media has really helped to destigmatize talking about this area of our bodies. I think people are seeking preventative care in this area and they're talking to their doctors about it. Doctors are asking about it. And it's becoming way more okay to just be like, hey, I just peed my pants when I was on a run. That's not okay. Like I'm going to actually go get some care about that.
Good. And you and I have been talking about it for a while now today. So hopefully this episode is going to encourage runners and other listeners to talk about these things because they are important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, going back to something you said earlier about returning to running postpartum, what are your recommendations about that?
Yeah, this is a great question and it's a really hot topic. There's been a lot more research done on it as of recently. So, my number one recommendation is before returning to any high impact activity postpartum, I recommend people get assessed by a pelvic floor PT. It is not standard of practice in the US for people to see a pelvic floor PT postpartum, but it is most certainly best practice and best recommendation to do so. When you do see a pelvic floor PT, if you're able to do that, they will screen you and make sure that your body is ready for the load of running. And so they should be doing tests that look at your ability to jump and land, your hip strength, your pelvic mobility and posture, your core strength, your pelvic floor function. So making sure all of those things have rehabbed well postpartum, because those things are really strongly affected by the process of pregnancy and delivery. So our pelvic floor and our connective tissue in our body and our ligaments become more lax during pregnancy and postpartum. And so going back to running too soon without that stability of our pelvic floor muscles and our core can lead to pain and lingering issues down the road. So number one recommendation is get assessed by a pelvic floor PT postpartum. Typically people will do that around their 6-week postpartum time frame, usually after they've seen and been cleared by their OB gynecologist. And then they will get cleared by that pelvic floor PT to start returning to running. And timeline for that can vary anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks postpartum up to it can take a year postpartum to feel fully ready to get back into running. So it's person to person dependent, but definitely just want to encourage people that if you are pregnant or you're newly postpartum, get everything checked out before you get back to running, because you want to make sure that when you get back to running, you can do so well and you don't have to deal with injuries along the road.
Great. That's fantastic advice. I know you have a lot of other great resources at your website. So where can people learn more about MoveSmart?
Checking out our blog. You've mentioned it a few times. Love that you've looked at our blog. So
my homework.
I love it. Yes. You can go to MoveSmartKY.com and we have a tab for our blog articles. And I have a section actually titled Pelvic Health. So you can kind of see all of my topics related to the pelvic health aspect of PT. I also have several articles on running and pelvic health. Secondly, you can follow us on Instagram, MoveSmartKY. And we post a lot of different reels and videos of educational content about running as well as pelvic health on there. So that can be a good place to connect with us. And if you have questions at all after listening to this episode, please don't hesitate. You can email me. Matt, you're welcome to throw my email in the episode description if you'd like to.
Okay, cool. I'll do that.
Yeah.
I'll put plenty of other show notes in there. So check those out. Learn more about MoveSmart. Kelsey, thanks for coming back on again and talking about this important topic.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again to Kelsey for joining the show and sharing her knowledge. Please rate, review, and subscribe to keep getting more helpful content like this. And again, visit johnsrunwalkshop.com for our sales and events listings and our holiday gift guide. We're giving you ideas for everyone on your list. Yes, we're a running store, but we're so much more. We have apparel from brands like Vuori and Smartwool. We have running watches, One Stone boots, Birkenstock sandals, and clogs. It's a great place for one-stop shopping. And if you're in the Hamburg area, you can now stop there for your holiday shopping needs. For John's Run Walk Shop, I'm Matt Reno, and we'll talk again soon on Kentucky Running.